The applause started before I even processed what I had just heard. For a moment, the room blurred. Faces, decorations, the polished walnut conference table. Everything felt distant and unreal. His daughter, his 22-year-old daughter, director of operations. I sat perfectly still, hands folded in my lap, pretending I wasn't drowning in disbelief. She had been here for 3 months. 3 months of learning the difference between revenue and profit. 3 months of asking why logistics schedules couldn't just be flexible. 3 months of smiling, nodding, pretending she understood systems I had spent 9 years building from the ground up. Yet there she stood, front and center, accepting congratulations for stepping into a role she hadn't earned, didn't understand, and couldn't possibly handle. My name wasn't even mentioned. People clapped out of obligation, not enthusiasm. Everyone knew what should have happened. Everyone knew who carried the weight of this company through supply chain crises, pandemic disruptions, staffing shortages, impossible clients, and budget cuts that would have collapsed any other team. Me, Kelly Sanders. But loyalty doesn't shine as bright as nepotism, not to some people. I forced myself to smile. My jaw trembled under the strain. I clapped twice, softly, just enough to blend into the noise. But inside me something shifted, slow, sharp, irreversible. When the meeting ended, everyone scattered, some eager to congratulate her, others desperate to avoid looking at me for too long. Silence hung around me like fog. I gathered my notebook, my hands steady in a way my heartbeat wasn't. As I stood, Mark, the company president, and her father stepped toward me with a smile that felt rehearsed. "Kelly," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder like we were running a family barbecue instead of a corporation. I know this might be unexpected, but Allison brings creativity, fresh perspective, youth. Youth. As if the years of experience, grit, and survival that shaped me were somehow a flaw. I nodded slowly. "Is that so?" He grinned, assuming compliance. That was his first mistake. "You'll help her transition," he added casually. "Make sure she understands how everything runs. Vendors, inventory flow, emergency protocols, carrier relationships, all the behind-the-scenes things." Behind the scenes, as if survival-level crisis management could be condensed into a PowerPoint. "Of course," I said. My voice sounded calm. Too calm. He tapped my arm twice before walking away. I waited until he disappeared down the hallway before exhaling. That was the moment I knew I was done. Not angry. Not yet. Not broken. I refused to be, but painfully, finally awake. For years, I sacrificed weekends, canceled vacations, worked double shifts when storms shut down the ports, negotiated with suppliers while my dinner went cold at home, and managed operations while my marriage unraveled under pressure. I did it because I believed loyalty mattered. But loyalty without value isn't loyalty. It's servitude. I walked back to my office, closed the door, and sat in silence. My resignation letter, half written months ago during a moment of burnout I never acted on, waited in a folder on my desktop. I opened it. My fingers moved without hesitation. Not emotional, not impulsive, not dramatic, just done. When I printed it, the thick paper felt heavier than expected, like a final decision taking shape in my hands. I placed it in a plain envelope and held it for a long moment. Not because I doubted my choice, but because it symbolized something bigger. The end of being underestimated. The end of waiting. The end of letting someone else decide what I deserved. At 5:02 p.m., when most people had already left and the building hummed with quiet, I walked back to Mark's office. The lights were still on. He was inside, laughing on a call. I knocked once. He waved me in without pausing his conversation. I placed the envelope on his desk. He finally hung up, still smiling, until he read the first line. The smile vanished. "Kelly, this is a resignation?" he asked, as if reading English for the first time. "Yes." A beat. Then another. He let out a short laugh, the kind people use when they think a situation is still under their control. "You're serious?" he asked. I I didn't respond. Silence was enough. His expression tightened, not with concern, but with irritation. Come on, Kelly, don't make things dramatic. This isn't necessary. But it was. And soon he would learn exactly why. Because what he didn't know, what he never bothered to understand, was that walking away wasn't a loss for me. It was a warning for him. And when the consequences finally arrived, weighed, measured, undeniable, he wouldn't be laughing. Not anymore. The morning after I submitted my resignation felt strangely calm. Not peaceful, just quiet in that unsettling way storms sometimes pause before tearing roofs off houses. When I walked into the building, people didn't greet me the same way. Some smiled too brightly, like they were relieved I hadn't quit in anger. Others avoided eye contact entirely. News travels fast in corporate walls, especially the kind that shakes power structures. My office door was closed, which was unusual. A yellow sticky note sat dead center. See me. Mark, no. Good morning. No professionalism. Just entitlement in 5 letters. I took my time settling in. Logged in. Checked emails. Noticed the sudden surge of meeting invites labeled urgent. The system we used automatically assigned tasks, and since Allison had been promoted, every alert flowed to her inbox. Not mine. By 9:15 a.m., she was already drowning. I heard her voice echo down the hallway. Tight. Shaky. Panicked. Kelly, hi, sorry, can you just come here? I stepped into her new office. She stood surrounded by papers, her laptop open to a vendor dashboard she didn't understand, her face pale with stress. I don't know what's happening, she whispered. 3 carriers are demanding rate renegotiations, 2 invoices are flagged, and the inventory schedule changed overnight. Of course it did. We'd been preparing for the winter surge for 4 months. Everything depended on precise timing. One mistake could cost millions. Where's your onboarding file? I asked. She blinked. My what? I inhaled slowly. She wasn't malicious, just wildly unprepared. Before I could respond, Mark appeared behind me. He didn't acknowledge his daughter's panic. His eyes were locked on me, tight with frustration masked as authority. Kelly, office, now. I followed him down the hall. He didn't speak until the door shut behind us. What game are you playing? He demanded. I raised an eyebrow. Resigning isn't a game. You blindsided me, he snapped. I expected professionalism. I almost laughed. Professionalism? I had swallowed disrespect for years. I sat across from him, calm. I submitted formal notice. That is professionalism. He leaned forward. You know Allison isn't fully ready yet. This transition requires your cooperation. 2 weeks isn't enough. There it was. His real fear. You need more time, he pressed. So let's renegotiate. If this is about money, it's not. He stopped talking. I think the simplicity of the statement unsettled him more than anger would have. He exhaled sharply. Kelly, listen. I chose my daughter because this company's future belongs to family. You're valued, but you're not family. There it was. The truth I'd suspected but never heard aloud. He continued, oblivious to how deeply he'd just revealed his mindset. You're reliable, solid, consistent, but you don't take risks. You don't push vision. You execute. Execute, I repeated quietly. The word echoed like an insult disguised as strategy. In his world, reliability was invisible until it was gone. He leaned back. So here's what we'll do. Withdraw your resignation, and once Allison finds her footing, we'll revisit your future. Maybe a higher title, maybe more pay. But only if we maintain stability. This was the moment he expected me to bend. He counted on obligation, on fear. Instead, I said, no. His jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said, but at least it's mine. For the first time since I'd known him, uncertainty flashed across his expression. He realized the one thing he never expected. I wasn't negotiating. I was already gone. I stood. I'll complete my remaining responsibilities. After that, the company will need to operate without me. He scoffed. Trust me, we'll be fine. But his voice wavered. When I returned to my office, someone had left a folded note on my desk. No name, just, if you leave, we lose stability. Please tell me there's a plan. I didn't know who wrote it. Could have been a manager, analyst, logistics lead. But the desperation behind it was real. This wasn't just about promotions or pride. My resignation wasn't just paperwork. I was infrastructure. And systems don't realize the value of stability until fracture begins. As I packed a small box with personal items, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not fear, not bitterness, freedom. Because leaving wasn't the end. It was the beginning of leaving everything that kept me small. And soon, very soon, Mark would find out exactly what that meant. By the start of my second week of notice, the energy in the office felt different. Not loud and chaotic, just tense in a way you could feel before you heard it. People weren't asking whether I was really leaving anymore. They were asking what would happen when I did. The first crack appeared Monday morning. At 9:07 a.m., my phone buzzed twice, once with a carrier alert, and then immediately with a second notification marked critical priority. I froze for a second, reading the subject line. Port release rejected. Seattle Terminal 4. That shouldn't have happened. Not if documentation had been handled correctly. I opened the shared system and saw the update. The customs paperwork had been submitted with the wrong classification code. A rookie-level mistake. Something that would lock containers in port until corrected. And every hour meant thousands lost. Allison was already pacing outside my office, clutching her laptop like a life vest. "Kelly, I need help," she whispered, breath unsteady. "The port won't release the cargo. Morrison Freight is threatening to pull all coastal contracts. Dad's already called twice." Her voice cracked, and for the first time since she stepped into the company, she looked less like a confident heiress and more like a young woman in the wrong role, at the wrong time, under the wrong expectations. "Sit," I said gently. "Show me everything." She sank into the chair across from me, opening tabs so quickly her fingers shook. There it was. 3 missing signatures, 1 incorrect code, and a bypassed audit field the system flagged, but she approved anyway, probably because she didn't understand the warning. "This isn't irreparable," I said, "but it needs to be fixed before noon." Her eyes widened. "Noon? Yes. After that, penalty fees start stacking." She nodded rapidly, writing everything down like a student terrified of failing an exam. Halfway through the fix, Mark stormed into the doorway. His face was red. Not the angry red, but the scared red. The kind leaders get when they realize control is slipping and people are watching. "Allison," he said sharply. "Conference room, now." She hesitated, glancing at me first. A small human instinct, seeking direction, something she should have been trained for, not thrown into. "She can go after we fix this," I said calmly. His eyes snapped to me. "You're not in charge anymore." "No," I said, "but the port deadlines still exist." Silence stretched. He looked back at his daughter, then at the tabs open on her screen, then finally, at the fear in her eyes. 5 minutes, he muttered, and left. When the problem was finally fixed and I clicked submit, Allison let out a shaky breath like she'd been holding it for hours. "Why didn't he train me?" she whispered. I didn't answer. She already knew. Later that afternoon, 3 department heads came to my office. One at a time at first, then together. Not officially. Not loudly. Just closed the door, lower voices, and unspoken panic. "Kelly, who will manage vendor renewals? Who has the template for the emergency reroute protocols? Who does Morrison Freight contact after you leave?" These weren't small tasks. They were structural, system level, systems I built, systems only I fully understood. Around 4 p.m., my email pinged again, this time with a meeting invitation titled Transition Planning, Mandatory Attendance, Mark, Allison, Executive Leadership, and me. When I walked into the conference room, the mood was already tense. Charts were pulled up on the screen, At first glance, it looked like a review. But then I realized what it really was. Damage control. Mark cleared his throat. We need to outline processes Kelly manages so the team can assume responsibility smoothly. Soft, diplomatic words hiding a deeper truth. He didn't know how much I actually handled. I began listing projects, responsibilities, vendor relationships, system triggers, scheduling logic, crisis protocols, carrier negotiation procedures, compliance checks, things they assumed were automated, self-running, effortless. But nothing ran itself. I did. Halfway through, one of the executives, someone who rarely spoke in meetings, turned to Mark. You assigned all this to her alone? Mark stiffened. She preferred independence. I met his eyes. No, I preferred competence. There was a shift in the room, subtle but unmistakable. For the first time, people weren't looking at me as staff. They were looking at me as leverage. When the meeting ended, Mark stopped me at the doorway. Kelly, he said quietly, we need to discuss extending. No. His jaw clenched. You're walking away from everything you built. I'm walking away from everything you took for granted. His expression changed. Not anger, not confusion, fear. Because he finally understood what resignations really were. Not exits. Consequences. And mine had only just begun. My last day arrived faster than anyone expected. Most resignations fade into background noise. An email, a handshake, a quiet exit. Mine didn't. The closer the end came, the more visible the fractures became. Support tickets piled up. Vendor calls doubled. Deadlines slipped. And suddenly, the confidence people once had in Mark's leadership turned into quiet uncertainty. No one said it out loud. Not yet. But everyone felt it. The company was changing, and not in the way anyone hoped. That morning, I came in early, before the hallways filled, before panic or politics could find me. The office was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint sound of trucks backing into loading docks outside. I packed the last of my belongings, one framed photo of my son, a mug with chipped paint, a notebook full of scribbles only I could interpret, and a flash drive. Not with company files, but with every lesson I'd learned about myself over the years. At 8:17 a.m., the storm began. The operations line rang, loud, sharp, insistent. I ignored it. I wasn't on the clock anymore, not mentally, not emotionally. Seconds later, my email pinged with the subject. Urgent, Morrison Freight, refusing dispatch. My stomach tightened. Not with responsibility, but with memory. Morrison was our biggest account. If their freight didn't move, penalties kicked in automatically. Then another alert, and another. 3 ports, 2 carriers, 1 unpaid storage invoice that should have been processed days ago. My door opened without a knock. Allison stood there, eyes red, shoulders tense, voice small. Kelly, everything is falling apart. There was no defensiveness in her tone, no entitlement, just fear and honesty. Before I could respond, Mark appeared behind her. He didn't look angry this time. He looked like someone realizing gravity existed. We need you, he said, voice low but urgent. Just for today. Just until we stabilize things. I stared at him. For years, those words would have meant validation. Proof my work mattered. Now they felt like chains someone else expected me to willingly put back on. This isn't my responsibility anymore, I said softly. He stepped fully into the room, tone shifting into desperation disguised as authority. You built these systems. No one else understands them. This company needs you. I shook my head. No, this company needed me when loyalty should have mattered. Not now, when you're panicking. His jaw tightened. Kelly, if these shipments fail, we could lose half our quarter revenue. Do you understand the scale? I do, I said calmly. That's why I built safeguards, templates, contingency routes. But someone still had to lead. Someone had to know why those safeguards mattered, not just where they lived. He looked away. Not because I was wrong, but because I wasn't. Allison stepped forward. "Please," she whispered. "I don't want to fail." Her voice hit differently, not as a plea for rescue, but as honesty from someone who finally understood the weight of a role she never earned. I took a breath. "I can't fix everything for you, but I'll leave you with clarity." I handed her a folder, one I'd printed the night before. Inside was everything she truly needed: contacts, escalation trees, routing logic, emergency wording for contracts, timing windows, and negotiation leverage points. Not the shortcuts, the structure. She opened it slowly, eyes widening. "You wrote all this?" "Yes," I said. "Not for your father. For the people who still care about the work." She nodded once, and for the first time since her promotion, she didn't look overwhelmed, just determined. That moment was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. One of the executives burst in. "Kelly," he said breathlessly. "Morrison Freight just called corporate. They're moving their business, unless you personally remain their point of contact." Mark's face went pale. Now he understood the cost. Not anger, not spite, but reputation. Mine had value. His didn't. He turned to me, voice cracking under pressure. "Tell me what you want." It wasn't a negotiation. It was surrender. I looked at the man who once assumed my loyalty was permanent and predictable. "I don't want anything," I said. "I'm already leaving." Then I picked up my box, walked past him. Past the office I kept running for 9 years. Past the people who now understood what leadership really looks like. When the doors slid closed behind me, I didn't feel triumph, just clarity. Because sometimes the most powerful move isn't fighting to stay. It's finally choosing to walk away. For the first time in years, I woke up on a weekday without an alarm, without urgency, without the weight of someone else's expectations pressing against my ribcage. I made coffee slowly, not gulping it between phone calls and spreadsheets. My house felt different. Bigger, quieter, and strangely unfamiliar, like a place I was finally meeting instead of just sleeping in. But the silence didn't last. By noon, my phone had already lit up with missed calls. 4 from vendors, 2 from former coworkers, and 1 from a number I recognized instantly. Morrison Freight. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I finally understood something I had ignored for too long. My time, my work, my knowledge had value. And value doesn't beg. 2 days later, an email arrived from a private logistics firm I'd briefly spoken to months earlier. They'd heard I'd left. They wanted a meeting. Just a conversation, they wrote. No pressure. The meeting wasn't fancy or dramatic. It was just me, a conference table, and a hiring director who wasn't trying to impress me, just trying to understand me. He'd done his research. He knew my work. He knew what I'd built. "Kelly," he said after reviewing my portfolio, "we aren't looking for someone to follow instructions. We're looking for someone to lead." It wasn't flattery. It was recognition. By the end of the week, I signed a new contract. Director of Regional Operations. A real title. A real position. One earned, one respected. 40% higher pay, better benefits, flexible hours, and a team that wanted mentorship, not a figurehead. It felt surreal, like stepping into a life I always belonged to, but never believed I could demand. Word travels in the logistics world faster than freight ever will. 3 weeks into my new role, the shift became visible. Morrison Freight officially terminated their contract with my old company. 2 more followed. Then another. Within 6 months, the company I had once poured myself into publicly reported a revenue decline of nearly 40%. Oversight boards got involved. Shareholders demanded answers. Rumors spread. Eventually, someone forwarded me an article. Leadership missteps and rapid decline. How one promotion reshaped an entire regional market. And there it was, Mark's name, not as a leader, but as a cautionary tale. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just sat with it, quietly, because revenge didn't feel triumphant. It felt balanced. A month later, I ran into someone I hadn't expected. I was walking into a coffee shop near my new office when I saw her, Allison. Hair pulled up, no designer handbag, dark circles beneath her eyes, and a notebook open in front of her, filled with supply chain diagrams. She looked up and froze. Then she stood. Kelly, hi. Her voice wasn't embarrassed, just honest. Hi, I said. She hesitated and then asked, Do you have a minute? We sat. She didn't try to defend what happened. She didn't minimize it. She didn't blame her father. Instead, she said quietly, I wasn't ready. I think deep down I knew that. But I wanted to make him proud. I thought if I tried hard enough, I'd eventually grow into the role. That wasn't fair to you, I replied. She nodded slowly. I've enrolled in a supply chain certification program. I want to learn the work, not inherit it. There was something fragile and real in her tone. Growth, humility, humanity. Before I left, she asked one final question. Do you hate me? I didn't even need to think. No, I said. You weren't the problem. Her exhale was quiet, but it carried weight. As I walked back outside, the air felt different. Not like escape, but like arrival. Life had forced me to confront a truth I avoided for years. Loyalty without boundaries isn't dedication. It's self-abandonment. I gave that company everything, until I realized they would never give anything back. And leaving wasn't betrayal. It was self-respect finally waking up. Now, when I walk into work, people don't look past me. They look to me. Not because I demanded recognition, but because I finally stopped waiting for permission to have it. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't what falls apart when you leave. It's what finally grows when you do.